Welcome to Reading Rule, y'all, where we talk about all things rural YA literature and to the rural authors who write it. I'm your host, Dr. Shay Parton, and I'm excited to talk to you about today's topic at hand. If you're a teacher, student, or community member in a rural community, my hope is that the content here honors you and your experiences by discussing and analyzing books that can serve as a mirror for you. If you're an urban or suburban teacher, student, or community member, this series is for you too, and I hope that it can provide nuance to the stereotypical depictions of rural people so often seen in popular media. So come on in, and let's get to it. Hey, and welcome to the final installment of our Winter White and Wicked series featuring our author talk with Shannon Dittemore. She is an author and speaker, and her young adult books include the Angelized Trilogy, which is a supernatural foray into the invisible world, as well as the fantastical adventure duology. We've been talking about Winter White and Wicked, which is book 1, and its sequel, book 2, Rebel, Brave, and Brutal, is currently out now, and if you haven't gotten it, I highly recommend it. Shannon's stories feature unforgettable characters who grapple with fear and faith as they venture into the wilds of the unknown. She's often wondered if she's just writing her own quest for bravery again and again. It's a choice she values highly, bravery, and she's never more inspired than when young people ball up their fists and punch fear in the face. To that end, Shannon frequently offers classes providing junior high and high school students with an introduction to creative writing and the publishing industry, which are tools that she hopes will enable them to use their voices in new and powerful ways. Together with authors Stephanie Morrill and Jill Williamson, she encourages young writers online at Go Teen Writers, which is an instructional blog recognized by Writers Digest 5 years running as a 101 Best Websites for Writers selection. To learn more about Shannon's books or speaking engagements or to request an event, visit her website at shannondittemore.com. So let's get to that interview. It was a great conversation, and I'm excited for y'all to hear it. I'm so excited to have Shannon Dittemore here with us today, author of Winter White and Wicked. Welcome, Shannon, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
So the first question I always ask everybody on this series / podcast is, where are you from, and how do you think that's influenced who you are as a person and a writer?
I was born in the Pacific Northwest, so Portland, Oregon. I did not live there very long at that time. My parents moved home to my dad's hometown, which is in Northern California. So I grew up in the Sacramento Valley. I was very suburban throughout my whole, I lived in the suburbs until very recently. My grandparents had a house in McFarland, California, which is, there's actually a Kevin Costner movie called McFarland. Have you heard of this thing?
No.
Oh, you'll have to go watch it now. And I think it's much more grown up in the movie because they've grown just like the rest of, the country, but they are a farming town in Central California. They do a lot of cotton and a lot of walnuts. And so I spent a lot of time running through cotton fields, a lot of time getting chased out of the cotton fields, actually, a lot of time being like yelled at my grandmother to get out of the walnut orchard. And I don't really even know what a sump hole is, but we used to climb in them when we weren't supposed to do that. So we got yelled at that too. But I think for years, I wanted to write something set in McFarland or in it's in Kern County, California, and another town that was set there. But man, I can never land on anything that's stuck in my head long enough to keep writing it. So, I think that if an idea doesn't grab you and hold on, for the long haul, it's going to be misery to edit that thing into perfection. So I never really kind of wrote anything there, but definitely was inspired by the area and the people that live there. About 2.5, 3 years ago, my husband took a job up in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. And so we've been living up here for, like I said, about 3 years, 2.5, 3 years. We spent all of last year and a half up in the mountains in a little tiny town called Colfax, which is right at the snow line. So we had our first time dealing with wildfires right on top of us, and which is a California problem, especially for rural communities. And then we also had our very first time being completely and utterly snowed in. I'd never had a white Christmas before. And after that, I don't know that I want another one. I don't know if you live in a white Christmas area, but I had never done that. I think because I'm really, I mean, like, people talk about living in rural communities and I'm just learning. I've only been up here for a short amount of time. For me, my grandparents' house was a playground. And so I didn't have the burden of working in the community. I didn't live in the community. I was just there for vacations and weekends. But here I've learned a lot about how the people kind of connect with the land, and I'm really dependent upon not only just the land, but the weather. The seasons have been, I mean, it's been kind of a shocking transformation how long I went without ever considering the weather affecting my life, because it never really did when I was in the suburbs. So to see that in a very practical way has been eye-opening. And you kind of do see just the necessary differences between living kind of farther from a city. And that's been it really, really, I really think confirming, because with Winter White and Wicked specifically, I you know, I just really wanted to write an adventure, and a lot of it was kind of instinct and doing some research. So living up here, I found we live right off a trucking route, and so seeing all that's really kind of cool, and realizing just the danger and the risk that comes with all of it. So yeah, I think what you see, and I also think what you read does really impact what you write, and I'm really grateful for the exposure to something new.
Yeah. So I don't currently live in a place that usually has white Christmases. I live in Temple, Texas. But originally from a tiny town called Gaston, Indiana, that had about 800 people in it. And I grew up on an 80-acre farm. We now have 134 acres.
Oh my goodness.
We raised hogs for a little while. And now we just do like corn and soybeans. But I totally get the, like you change, like you have to change according to your environment. So whether you're going from an urban place to a suburban place to a rural place, or, vice versa, like the sort of interaction between who you are as a person and where you are in place, I think, affects who we are as people. And when it affects who we are as people, it also affects who we are and how we write as writers. And so I think that totally tracks. I don't think I've ever technically been snowed in, but we've had ice storms where like we've had to use our generator. And then actually down here, we had what we called snowvid, where ERCOT, like Texas isn't on the grid. It's not on the national grid. We had
I remember hearing that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's constantly mismanaged. So we were without power and frigid temperatures, where a lot of people froze to death for 4 days. And I had a 4-month-old baby, and like an 18-month-old.
And you're not just like right there, you can't just pop into the grocery store, or the whole grocery store is out of power too. And it's, it's a challenge.
Or you can't get there because the roads are iced over, because they have no infrastructure for that either. But right now, today, it's 80 degrees and it's January something. And I was talking to my neighbor who's down here from Minnesota, and I'm just like, do you feel weird? Like, I feel weird.
It should be colder than it is. Yeah, my sister moved to San Antonio recently, so I didn't know anything about your guys's thunderstorms and how epic those can be. So she's always sending us videos. I wouldn't suggest being snowed in if you can avoid it. We had they couldn't even get, utilities up there for a couple of weeks because there were so many trees down. And that was the really kind of terrifying thing, was just when the trees kind of became weaponized, because you're just, they get so heavy with snow. And then, it was new for us. We had a generator that did not start. So eventually we got it fixed, but we had a very large amount of time without that. So yeah, it's tricky for sure.
Yeah. And it does affect like how you think and who you consider yourself to be in those moments,
Right. No, absolutely. And I think that sometimes we forget that, there really is a difference in your living situation. And so how you begin to think about certain laws or certain freedoms. Just it ends up being a little different because it really does affect you practically. And so I do see that for sure up here. While people are very different and diverse, but there are things they hold in common, and I see that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think overall, like collections of people are more complex and nuanced than anybody really likes to think, because it's just
True.
easier to think in more simplistic terms. But yeah, I totally resonate with that. You mentioned Winter, White and Wicked, which I absolutely loved, by the way. And I will confess, I'm not usually a fantasy reader. And so I was like, I went into it not knowing how I would feel about it, or not knowing if I would like it or not. And I absolutely loved it. And I've been waiting for Rebel Brand, and Brutal to come out so
Send you one.
that I can read it. So I can know what happens next. But one of the things that your book got me thinking about is the role of rurality in fantasy and speculative fiction. Monica Rowe has a story called The Unhealthy Breakfast Club, where one of the characters is really into fantasy, and he says something like, fantasy is all about, like, basically, he doesn't use these words, but like is basically about rural out migrants, right? Like these heroes that are growing up in these rural towns, and who else can go out and do whatever needs to be done and then come back. Who has the fortitude, who has the wherewithal, who has what it takes, right? Other than a rural person. And so I had never thought about that before. I read that one first, and then I read Winter, White and Wicked, and I just started thinking about that and about the role that rurality plays in those kind of genres. And so I was wondering, when you were writing Winter, White and Wicked, did you think of it as a rural book? And like, how do you think that affected the way that you shaped the landscape, and how the landscape shapes the cultures and the characters and the action of the story?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this question because I think it's a good question, especially when we're talking about where story comes from. But I think that I wouldn't have said, if you, especially before I even knew that, the Whippoorwill Award was a thing, and before I even knew that people were talking about rural fantasy, I would have said it was a blue collar fantasy. And I think that was intentional. That was me. Once I had this story idea, which is kind of a whole story in and of itself, but once I had this story idea, I was very inspired by the history. I think it's the History Channel show Ice Road Truckers. I don't know
Yeah.
if you okay, if you've ever seen it. So, but I mean, it would never have seemed appropriate to kind of pluck people from a big city and try to write this story. So the correct characters felt very blue collar. I also think that, I mean, you made such a great point about how hard you have to work to exist in an environment like that. And then, you're adding ice, perpetual ice and snow, that my characters are dealing with, and you have got to be tough. I remember watching part of the story, the way the story idea came to me was just kind of remembering, well, I'll really quickly. I'll just say we had gone to Disneyland, right? My family were California people, so that's where we go. And we had gone to Disneyland, and we like to go at Christmas time because it's winter all the time. They make it, and it's pretty winter. Like Elsa makes it magical, and it snows, and it's lovely. And there's sledding, pretend sledding, but still. And so we always like to go at the summer or at the winter. And we were coming home. I think it was November, December, and we were coming home, and we were on Highway 99 in California, which takes you through all the stinky, you're through the cow town. You're going, there's cows everywhere, and it's a major trucking lane. So you've got semi trucks just on your right and left constantly. And my brain just starts wandering because it's a drive home. And I remembered this commercial from the History Channel for the Ice Road Truckers. At that point, I had not watched a single episode, but the commercial stuck with me because it was like this pretty lady. She was a woman, blonde lady with her like mug, just like my mug here. She's like holding her coffee mug, talking to the camera, and it's like night vision because they're doing this whole special, whatever evening thing. And wind like strikes the truck and shakes everything. And it's like she looks at the camera with her eyes wide, and then it's like Ice Road Trucker Saturday at 4 or whatever it was, And that's what I like remembered in my head. And I had this Elsa magic, and I had this trucker, this reality, and it kind of just collided. And I thought, I wonder what it would be like, one, to just be a female trucker who is, her body's smaller, she's naturally fine boned, that specific lady was. I mean, how is she lifting chains, and how is she, like, what does that look practically? And then what if, the magical side, what if Winter had some ideas about, like, what if Winter was a spirit, was animated and had some ideas about her journey and whether or not she gets to arrive safely. And really, that's just where it started. And so, but I think about just the toughness and the strength these people have, that do these jobs day in and day out. Whereas me, I'm complaining if I can't get the Instagram algorithm to cooperate. And it's just a very different type of a lifestyle. So playing with it, pretending I got to be an ice road trucker was a lot of fun. And I had written two really theme heavy books. And I was really ready to just go on an adventure. And then you've read the books, so theme comes because we feel strongly about certain things. And I dare anyone to write, a 400-page book without your theme showing up on the page. It just does, right? But I think initially it was fun for me to put myself in someone else's shoes and realize how hard, she had to work to just get paid, to just get paid. So it was fun. It was really fun dreaming up Winter. And I think that, other books, I was thinking of other, it's really not a book, it's a movie, but do you remember the old movie, The Abyss, with Ed Harris, and I think it's Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio. It's just worth a watch because it's not rural, but it's blue collar. And it's these, they're oil riggers who
Mhm.
live or who are working on the bottom of the sea. They have the first special rig of whatever kind it is. But while they're down there, there's like a hurricane or something, and their rig gets dragged to the edge of an abyss. And at the bottom of it, there seems to be some kind of, I don't know if extraterrestrial is the right word, but some sort of alien creature. And so you kind of get this awesome blue collar meets fantastical. And I've always been drawn to that. And so I love it. I love people that work together as a team. And so I don't know that I thought urban, but I definitely thought blue collar.
Yeah. And I think that those intersections of place and class are really important to me, and they're part of my work and the way that I think about working class people in urban places. Is
Yeah.
that experience is a lot different than working class somebody in a rural place, because you can't just like pop down to the bodega for $1 bag of chips,
No.
you got to get in your car if you have one, if it's working, and you drive probably at least 15 to 20 minutes to the nearest
Right.
store if you have gas. And if you don't, then you don't, and you
Right.
gotta figure something out, And so, I think that that's what really struck a chord with me in this story. My Uncle Dave is a trucker. I've got cousins who are truckers. My dad's whole family and my mom's whole family, my entire life, farmers and factory workers. And so I grew up working class, and so those stories are really important to me because I don't remember reading them in ways where working classness or rurality weren't pathologized, and they weren't something that needed to be fixed or cured,
Right. That's a really good point. I really like that a lot because you see it in, I'm a huge murder mystery reader. I love murder mysteries, but a lot of times, the murderer is some crazy person who grew out in the sticks. And I'm also, for the record, the daughter, and I'm the daughter of a preacher. And so if I have to watch one more pastor be you know what I'm saying? Like there's just things that end up being very cliched. And for those of us who live those existences, it gets old, right? And we need things new, and we need to see things shown in a more honest light.
Yeah. And I think that especially now that fantasy and speculative fiction are doing that and can do that in a way that realistic fiction maybe has some trepidation about, because of the way books are being banned, because of the way that teachers are, having to soft censor in schools and their classrooms. And I think that speculative fiction can deal with these kind of themes of resource extraction communities,
Absolutely.
and racism, and classism, and hate crimes against LGBTQ people, and all of this stuff. I think speculative fiction has the opportunity to deal with that in ways that are more palatable to people in society who would like to erase those from classrooms and from libraries, because it's just a story. It's speculative fiction. It's just made up. It's not real. It doesn't even pretend that it's real,
Right. Right.
And so that's another thing that I was thinking about, especially with Winter, White, and Wicked, because I ran a rural teachers like book club, and we read Winter. And we all loved it. And when we started talking about it, we started talking about the characters and the ways that we racialize them in our minds, even without being explicitly told that they were racialized in this society in this specific ways. And of course, they belong to different categories because it's speculative fiction, right? But we are talking about how we definitely assumed that Sylvie was white, and we definitely understood. I'm blanking on his name now. How's that possible?
Ken the
Huh?
Ken.
Yeah, Ken. Yeah.
Ken. Yeah.
I definitely assumed that he was Black. And you never write that in the story. There's
I think I comment on his skin tone, like his color, but
it was just a rock.
Yeah. He has darker skin. That's mentioned. But I think my concern when I was describing Ken, and really it was a conversation like between me and my editor, because it was like, I don't want to leave his skin color. I don't want people guessing what this guy looks like for the whole. I think that's frustrating as a reader to like not understand what someone looks like, and then to be told 300 pages in, that they look different than your brain has conjured them up. So I wanted to be sort of clear up front, but also I didn't want to say that every member of the Shiv all had the same skin tone, because I wanted their history to be different than our history here in America. And so I was able to play that, but I think it is difficult because you will automatically read things. I think people read all of the Shiv people a certain way. And you almost can't fight that as an author. That's where like you bring half the book and then the reader brings half the book, right? Like it's a cooperation between the two. But you can be considerate and you can be aware of that. And I hope I was able to do that in a way that is honoring, I think the one thing that's cool about Winter is that everybody that's featured in it, with maybe the exception of Hyla, but everyone that's featured in it is a minority of some point, or a marginalized person of some point, of some, yeah.
Yeah. And I think so. Yeah. So like the layering of identities and the way that those shape our lives and our existences, like in real, in our realities, and how that can be mirrored, but also played with in a speculative reality, I think is really important. And I think that's why speculative fiction is so like popular, and people are really into fantasy now. I think more than when I was a reader. At least that's my own perspective. I don't know, maybe it's just because of where I came from, but I think that that's one of the reasons why I think you can attend to the sort of complexities that exist here in our realities in a way that may not be possible in more realistic genres. And so like, I really appreciated that about the book. I really appreciated, especially like the class forward nature of it, because I think that's one of the marginalized identities that gets left out a lot, and the sort of layering of class and race and gender and sexuality and like all of those things. I think that class usually is mentioned last, but I think it's one of the things that affects people's experiences.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Most.
Yeah, your ability to make and keep income. I think those are, or like income that comes to you. I mean, like you look at Sylvie and Lenore in the book, Sylvie's paranoid once Lenore has left, and for good reason. They're going to lose absolutely everything. And so I think we shortchange that a little bit, and we just forget about finances, and that is to our detriment, I really think.
Yeah, I agree. And especially as somebody, thinking about the whole windows, mirrors, sliding glass doors thing, like as somebody who was working class, although has since transitioned into a more middle class existence. I think that I would have benefited from being able to see my working classness represented in a more, I don't know, appreciative light.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I really liked that. I really appreciated that about Winter, White, and Wicked. And I think it's something that scholars need to think about more. And so I've been I'm glad to be seeing it pop up more and more in YA.
Yeah, me too. I really am. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question, I think I wrote based on the assumption that you identified as rural, but it sounds like maybe that's not true. But from your perspective and your experience and sort of the transactions of kinds of places that you've experienced, like, what do you think is one thing that people get wrong about rural people or rural living that you'd like to set the record straight about?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. And I think you hit on it before a little bit. We talk about just assumptions that if you live far out, you must be uneducated or you must, I mean, and I think it's completely just erroneous. I think also what we have a tendency to assume is that everything that they do, everything that people who live in rural communities do is so different than everything that people in urban communities do. And that's not the case either. There's a lot of similarities. We get on the internet. It might be more difficult because we might have some sort of, location issues with that. But like there are a lot of teenagers that are living very similar online existences to those that live in cities. But we can't really pretend that life is exactly the same. You mentioned driving before. I have never in my life driven as much as I have now, living up in the foothills. And then when we were living in the mountains, we hadn't moved our kids yet to their different school. And so, because my son was finishing his senior year of high school, so we drove constantly down into the valley to take them for his senior year and my daughter's 8th grade year. We just did that drive 40 minutes each way, 40 minutes down, 40 minutes back up, 40 minutes down, back up every single day. I mean, and you talk about the cost of that. So you do still have in rural communities, you have wealthy people and you have poor people. I know when gas got astronomical here in California, and it's still not great, but it's better than it was for a bit. When it got astronomical, there were people who literally could not drive to work. They worked closer to the city, but their car is not going to make it there and back. So it really does, the drive itself, everything's a little bit farther apart. The drive itself is very impactful. I remember visiting this really small coastal town of Bolinas, California, and it's in the Marin Headlands, which is near the Golden Gate Bridge, and it's kind of sandwiched between this lagoon and the Pacific Ocean. So it's not, it's not out in the country, but it's very isolated. And I think the thing I was so blown away by was how affected that little tiny town is by every single thing the Pacific Ocean does. I mean, it storms. I mean, their houses were hanging over the water. Every yard had like crab cages just stacked, because that's how they made their money. And I think that I think there are differences. I mean, there's difference when people live in an isolated situation. Also, a lot of people do that. They're choosing. They're usually some were raised there and grown and had lived there their whole lives. And then there are people who choose to live there for the isolation itself. So not everyone has the same reason for being where they are, and not everyone has the same resources just because they're neighbors. So I think that, I think it's different. I think living where we do is like our situation is different, but we have the same emotional needs that anybody has, and I say I mean, I'm up here now, but there were, I think I'm learning that about the people. There's so many things that are really similar and so many things that like, wow, I never even thought about. You can't leave because who feeds your horses, or very basic. I worry about my dog. I have a dog, but like you've got cattle, of course you're not going on vacation. So it's a very different type of situation. And I think a lot of times that's written off as either, redneck or backwoods without any type of consideration for just the intelligence and the work it takes to actually keep a farm or any type of, rural living going.
Yeah. And I think that that's because our entire sort of like media, including academic research, including publishing, like everything is so urban normative and metrocentric that it's almost impossible. I think maybe it's getting more into like ever since like Duck Dynasty or, the Moon and Ice Road Truckers and like Homesteaders, or like that show, I can't remember what it's called, but Alaska, where they're, it's
Alone
all in rural Alaska. Yes. So those things I think are becoming more popular, but at the same time, they're also kind of caricaturized for audiences so that we can still poke fun at those people in some way, because, you know, who doesn't love a good redneck joke, except for people who identify that way, right?
Sure.
Even though they're still sort of considered acceptable and okay, which is really annoying to me. But anyway, I think that yeah, you know, rural people a lot are monolithized, and everybody just assumes every rural community is all white and they're just all out on their front lawns waving bad flags and doing bad things. But as Monica Rowe said, that I can't say that without giving her credit, but I thought it was such a brilliant way to put it. And so I think that that's one of the things that annoys me too, is that again, we don't lack the ability to attend to complexity and nuance. We just don't do it because it's easier not to. And so that's why I really appreciate you and all the other Whippoorwill Award winners and the award itself for being in existence, and all of the folks out there who are writing stories that attend to rural experiences in a complex and nuanced ways that doesn't look with rose-colored glasses at rural experiences necessarily, but looks at them in complex ways that they don't really usually get taken up in wider media and literature.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's cool. Your award is cool. I'd never heard of it. It seems like what an interesting, it's just an interesting category if you really think about it.
Yeah, and it's new. So we're relatively young and we're just trying to, you know, get the word out that this is a thing that people can win, and hopefully help teachers find. That's why this exists. That's why this podcast exists. That's why my website Literacy in Place exists. And it's because I was a rural kid, and the only rural story I can really remember reading was like Charlotte's Web and canonical books like Steinbeck, but every single one of them pathologizes rurality in some way. And Charlotte's Web was super old, you know, even when I was in school as an elementary kid. And so, yeah, and I was just like, there's no way that farmer would save that pig. It didn't matter what that spider did, you know, like.
Oh, poor Wilbur. Yeah, it's rough.
It just didn't make any sense to me, and it didn't make no sense to my papawn either. And so it was just like, and so I'm really appreciative of you. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And a part of what I hope that this does too is acknowledges that there are people out there from rural communities or connected to rural communities that are writing about rural communities, because we can't read stories that serve as mirrors for rural young people if there aren't people writing them. And so another facet of my work deals with encouraging rural young people to tell rural stories, because they matter. And I grew up, I've said this a million times in this podcast, and so people who listen on the regular probably get sick of hearing it, but I truly believed as a kid that the only people who became writers and who became published lived in cities like Chicago, LA, and New York. And that if you didn't live in one of those cities, you were never going to be published. And not only that, but you couldn't tell stories that were like mine. You had to tell stories that belonged to those places.
Right.
And so I want rural young folks to know that that's not true, which is why we're getting, the judges are looking at submissions from the inaugural Rural Teen Writing Contest. And so one of the things that I like to ask authors who come on is like, what is your writing process like? What does that look like? That way, folks who are aspiring writers can get lots of different ideas, and they can try out things that they want to see what works for them. So what's your writing process look like?
Yeah, so I am a discovery writer at heart. So a lot of times we divide writers up into plotters and pantsers, right? I think most people are familiar with that. I think a discovery writer would technically be a pantser, somebody who writes by the seat of their pants. But I think it was Stephen King who really kind of brought the idea of discovery writing and talked about it. And as I was reading his book on writing, I remember feeling like, oh, I do that too. And he makes you feel like a genius, like it was all your idea. But I just feel like that's his magic actually about writing. But I kind of write to figure out the story. That's my first draft. I'm telling myself the story. I'm fumbling along. So it usually depends on how the idea itself arrives. It's not always the same for me. I told you how Winter White and Wicked landed in my head, that sweet little snowflake on Highway 99. And I think like what happens normally is I let the idea percolate for a bit. So on that trip home, my son was in the backseat. I think he was like 8. He's going away to college now, right? But like he was a teeny tiny little guy at Disneyland at the time. And the idea had struck him. We just started talking. I thought, what kind of a world would it be if winter was a spirit and there were trucks that were a huge part of the economy? What would that look like? So my kid just helped me brainstorm, and my husband, and we're all just driving. My daughter was too young to help, but we were just bouncing ideas off each other. And so I do that. I let it percolate for a bit. Which is actually a little difficult for me. It was probably better that I was in the car because I'm super fast. My brain is always moving and I want to just sit down and get it on the page.
Mm-hmm.
But the percolating part really helps. It really helps to kind of solidify a couple things in your head. Once I have some idea of who the protagonist is, the hero, and maybe where they are of the setting, I sit down and I start writing, and I just let myself find it for a little bit, find voice. I'm a big voice writer. I mean, let me say this. I hope I'm a voice writer. I'm a big voice reader. Do you know what I mean? Like I am I will read about paint drying on a wall if you can do it with voice. I just sit down and I start writing. Maybe 8 or 9 chapters in, when I get to kind of that word count, I'll have some idea of where I'm going. I will have probably established a story problem, the beginnings of one at least. And then I will kind of set my manuscript aside and I will just write a synopsis. And I call it a working synopsis because it's really for nobody else's eyes at this point. It's just me summarizing what I think the story is and where it's going. And once that's done, and it's usually really skeletal and incomplete, parts of it are real pretty because I like voice, and so I will have embellished, and parts of it are just empty because I have no idea. But I use that as my outline to kind of keep me writing in the right direction. And that's more, I would say, something I've started doing in the last 5 to 10 years. And the reason is, as a discovery writer, you can just waste a ton of time, and waste is the wrong word, but because all that experience is good for you. But if I'm on a deadline, I don't have the freedom to meander, right? Like I have to actually turn this in at some point. So I have to write to the story. So even though I give myself some freedom within that general synopsis to move and to bend and to change my mind, I have to keep myself moving in the right direction. Otherwise, I will be you on a porch talking to someone for 4 hours and never getting to the end of the story. I don't know how to say goodbye to a story. So that's why I give myself the synopsis portion as an outline. It helps me get there. Once I get a first draft done. Okay, so like once the first draft is fully done, I will self-edit it myself. And I think this is what gets skipped a lot in young writers. We forget that we need to do our best to edit it into a really good shape before we get anyone else's feedback. So you want to make it as nice and as pretty and as well edited as you can. We can talk about this in a minute. There's lots of good free tools on the internet to help you with that. And then because I've been around for a bit and I have some writing friends, I will have some beta readers. They will read my first draft. And my agent says this is so that they can catch the low-hanging fruit. And I think that that's really important because you're going to hand it to a publishing professional of some sort next, when you're in my shoes. So for me, it would either go to my agent if I'm trying to just write something to be contracted, or my editor if I'm already contracted for a project. So I try to get the majority of just the easy edits done before I hand it off to someone else. Deadlines really impact a lot. So sometimes I don't have time for beta readers because I haven't written fast enough. And sometimes I don't have time, to make too many edits. So I'll just use 2 beta readers instead of 4 because I can't process that much feedback. So I think it changes a little bit, but the hardest part for me, Shay, is drafting. And I would give you my heart if you would draft all my novels for me, because it's that my brain is a meanderer.
And I would say that to some degree, mine is too. I found that as I've been working on this project, it's like, is this really is this where I'm going next? Or do I need to go somewhere else? And that's one of the reasons why I think lyric novel or lyric, memoir or lyric like creative nonfiction is like where it is for me, because you can like pluck
because poems are like contained, sort of, right? Whereas like chapters, like they're kind of contained, but they're kind of not.
I'm looking at my bookshelf because there's a book I want to tell you about. Oh, did you ever read The Truth Project by Dante Medina?
No.
Oh, it's up your alley. It's lyrical
Okay.
and it's set in Alaska.
Okay.
Oh, you have to read it.
Right.
So anyway, recommendation.
Okay. Thank you. Truth Project. I got it.
Yes.
But yeah, so like you can kind of like move them around and they're a little more self-contained than what a larger chapter would be. And for me, like plotting something out, like it just feels so unwieldy because I do have a tendency to go off on tangents. And so, you know, I'm experimenting here. I've never done this before, and so we'll see where it goes. But
I'm excited for you. It sounds fun.
It's cathartic for me too. It's a way to process it's a way to process Papa's death. It's a way to process, you know, all the things that I learned from him in my childhood, even the things that I didn't really want to. And so, yeah, so I'm excited about it. And, you know, we'll see where it goes. I've never queered in my life. I've never, you know, never done anything like that. So, I have no idea what I'm doing really, but I've made quite a few friends through this podcast that I think would be willing to help me out. So which I think is also good advice. Like find friends who are willing to be helpful, whatever that means, whether it's if you need, you know, a kick in the pants, or if it's you need somebody to help you kill your darlings, or if it's, you know, you need somebody just to tell you that what you're doing matters and to stay the course and not listen to that imposter syndrome voice in your head. I think all of those things are really important. And I think I've met people like that through this podcast. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
I know that you need to go, and I do too, because I can hear my baby crying upstairs. So I just want to say thank you again. Thank you so much. I really appreciate talking to you. And you be careful what you wish for, because if I get this thing done, I will send it to you. And
absolutely. I hope you will.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope you will.
And then I'm looking forward to Rebel, Brave, and Brutal. I don't know why I always want to say beautiful.
It's like the longest confused. I mean, there's lots of B's in there, you know?
There is, yeah, but I think it's good though. I like the alliteration. Rebel, Brave, and Brutal. Hopefully, maybe we'll have a chance in the future to chat about that one.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks again.
Of course. Congratulations, Shay.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed this week's episode. If you like what you heard and want to support the show and keep it a viable endeavor for me, it'd be great if you would like and comment on the YouTube episode. You could talk about what you liked most or what you walked away with. It'd also help if you'd subscribe to the channel. You can also head over to the Support Us page on the Literacy in Place website. There you can learn about all the different ways you can support this work. Like, you can like and follow the website itself, find out where to engage with us via social media, and go leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Or you could shop our storefront on bookshop.org to get the book featured in this episode or any other books that catch your eye. You could also buy us a coffee at ko-fi.com and donate once or set up a recurring donation. All of this would be immensely helpful in keeping this show going. So thanks a bunch for doing what you can. Well, that's it for this episode. Until next time, y'all come back now, would ya?